In childhood trauma.
Oh, cheerful.
Yeah, but she
we need people like that.
Yeah. We're good? Okay. And we're live? Yes. Yay, here we are. Take two. We at TEDxSpokane are pleased to have so many of our alumni willing to come back and talk to us. We really have a wonderful TEDx community, and thank you for being a part of it. First, thank you to Spark Central, where we are recording this today. And thank to the people who are staying after to accommodate us. I appreciate it. And I know you and I were both important parts of getting this place off the ground back when it was called Inc.
Yes.
I don't know if people even know that. Spokane Trivia someday. But welcome back to Spark. Yes. Tonight I am speaking with Kris Dinnison, co-owner of Atticus Coffee and Gifts in downtown Spokane, whose novel You and Me and Him was released in 2015. And Kris also gave a TED Talk in 2015 that was called Young Adult Lit Belongs to Everyone. You and Me and Him is a young adult novel. I read it and I passed it around at our Lewis and Clark Library, so very well done on that. So tonight I want to start taking our conversation back to your TEDxSpokane experience. So can you tell us a little bit about your TEDx experience in 2015?
Yeah, so it was a pretty memorable experience. I mean, it's kind of, for somebody who loves TED, doing a TED Talk is a bit of a bucket list thing. So when I was approached about doing it, I was very excited and also very nervous because I knew that it was unlike, I mean, I was a teacher for 17 years, and unlike when you're a teacher where a lot of things are off the cuff and you have rapport and engagement with kids and stuff, that I knew that this was going to be a bigger stretch for me in terms of presentation and that kind of thing. So that made me nervous, but I had a great coach, Mike Houghton, did a great job. He's such an idea person and was really, really great at helping me pull the ideas together. They asked me specifically to talk about young adult literature, and I loved the idea of doing that because I think a lot of times people think YA lit is somehow dumbed down or isn't worthy in terms of ideas or writing from other lit. And I'm not saying that my book is something special, but some of the best storytelling and writing that I've read in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years is in the young adult market. And so young adult to me isn't something, it's a choice a marketing person makes about where to shelve a book rather than a choice somebody, that makes it either real literature or young adult literature. So I was very excited to talk about that, and then it was also very personal for me because I feel like a writer I know once told me that you kind of write to that age where you kind of got stuck. and one of my therapists one time told me you're stuck in your adolescence. So I thought, well, that kind of makes some sense.
So did writing the book get you unstuck?
Well, it was a very personal book for me. So there were a lot of things that I sort of worked through in terms of writing a book about the kind of person I wish I'd been in high school, faced with a lot of the same challenges my main character had. And that was kind of the gist of my talk, too, which is that when you're a young adult, when you're a teenager, and in that, just the beginnings of that going out into the world, you're full of possibility. You're full of dreams and things that you think might happen and you want to happen and all these kinds of things. And so much is possible. And as we get older, we forget to have that sense that so much is possible. And so young adult for me as a young adult lit and writing for young adults and working with young adults as a high school teacher was a lot about just keeping that energy of that, like, anything's possible. So I published this book. I didn't start writing this book till I was in my 40s. I didn't start writing anything till I was in my 40s. And the book was published when I was in my late 40s. Which is not a typical writer's journey. So for me, that kind of, those two things connected, that idea that, it's not all over if you don't make all your dreams come true by the time you're 30. There's still a lot of time. I sometimes say I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. So it was a great experience. I loved doing it. It was terrifying. There were so many great speakers that year. I just was in awe, and I just felt really honored to be there.
One of the things that I find is interesting is sometimes when you're planning something like that, you learn things about yourself in the planning of it. You say things that you didn't even know were inside of you. What did you feel like you learned about yourself, not only from the content of the talk, but from just planning that thing?
Well, I think one of the things I learned about myself is that I think, and I don't know if you can relate to this as a teacher, but when you're a teacher, you sort of go into teacher mode and you sort of do the thing. But I had been out of teaching for about 4 years, 4 or 5 years when I did the talk. And so going back into a room where, and I'd done a few presentations and things along the way for various things, but going back into a room where you're up in front like that, I realized that all that time I was a teacher, I was also an introvert, just kind of coping with that to be a teacher, because I loved the teaching and learning aspect, and being up in front of people was just something you have to do if you're going to do that. And so now I had this choice. I thought when I said yes, I thought, oh, this is great. I really want to do this. And then as it got closer and closer, I thought, I'm terrified to do this. Like, I don't know how to do this anymore. And so I think that was something that I sort of came to this realization that, oh, being in front of people isn't necessarily like where I'm most comfortable. I think I've gotten pretty good at it, but it's not necessarily like my comfort zone.
Yeah,
So
that
was
doesn't
a
give
thing.
you the thrill. That's not the part that gives you the thrill.
And then the other piece I think was just like I said, when you're a teacher, you have an idea of what you're teaching, you know the concepts, what you're going to do on a certain day, you're interacting, you have activities, those kinds of things. And so to be given 10 or 15 minutes where it's really just you following a thought through to the end or several thoughts through was a lot more challenging to have that. And then memorizing it, just memorizing it was, I can memorize song lyrics all day long, but memorizing a speech like that was really challenging.
It is. And in fact, I'm going to skip to one of the last question I was going to ask you. So if somebody was thinking about applying to be a TEDx speaker, what advice would you give them that you learned from your experience in 2015?
Just about learning the speech and stuff?
Well, just about the whole thing. I mean, what did you not know going in about the process? What do you think is the easy part of the process, the hardest part of the process? If somebody was thinking, I think I might want to do that, what might they need to know?
Well, it takes a lot of time because you do have to memorize, and it feels like maybe I can't remember what the time limit is on them, 10 minutes or something.
I think 18 is the limit.
8 is the limit.
Video.
Yeah, so it's like 10 to 18 or something was the range. That's a lot of words. It's when it's just you talking, it's a lot of words. So that process, I remember Mike was great. He said, record your speech in sections. And just listen to it when you're in the car, listen to it when you're working out, listen to it, and I'm sure that's advice a lot of the coaches give. And that was huge. So recording it and then listening to it just over and over and over and over again was a huge part of it. But I think the other thing was interacting with that coach was huge. Mike, like I said, is such an idea person. And so having somebody who, and of course he brings in all his Buddhist ideas and Rumi and all of these things that he loves, which was a beautiful way to elevate the ideas that I was working with as a sort of working writer, in the midst of this, like my book had come out that year. And so I was a newbie. I mean, I was a new writer, a brand new baby writer at 40, whatever. And so to have those ideas about not just my book, but books for teens and young adults in general, have those ideas elevated by the interaction with the coach in those discussions. So cherish that stuff.
As you were talking about being a new writer, I've talked to you a little bit about this before, but you took such an odd route to getting to where you were. Did you feel pretty fortunate to be able to get published? What was that process like? Especially, if somebody's out there thinking it's too late for me to start writing a novel, you probably thought that too. So what was that process like?
Well, yeah, I really feel very, very lucky. So when I left teaching in 2009, I was just going to take a leave from teaching for a semester, and then my husband said, let's buy this other company. We already had Boo Radley's at that point for 20 years or whatever, and he said, let's buy this other store. And so I never went back to teaching because I was needed now, and we had 2 businesses, and I was needed in the business. And so when I realized I wasn't going back to teaching and wasn't going to be in charge of teaching other people to write all the time, I decided, okay, well, here's my chance to teach myself to write. And I had done some freelancing and things like that, but I'd really never written fiction. I'd never taken a creative writing class. I'd never done anything.
Wow. So this is completely fresh.
Completely. I've always
out of left
wanted
field.
to, but
Yeah.
I had been, I can't remember, I was like the shadow artist, the person who reads all the stuff that they admire and worships all the people at the feet of all the people, but they think they can't do that thing themselves. And so I had been that person, but had convinced myself that I didn't have any good ideas and So, a good idea, family story landed in my lap, and so I started kind of trying to write this family story based on my mom's sister. And it was a great story, but I knew I didn't have the skill set. I could tell had written a draft of it and it wasn't very good, and I tried it a different way and it wasn't very good. And I was talking to my daughter, Kate, who you taught one day, and I said, I just don't know, I probably won't ever get published. And she goes, well, it's such a great story. Maybe you should just write a practice novel and write that one when you're better at writing. And I said, oh, that's brilliant. I'll write a practice novel. So I wrote a practice novel. And
Easier said than done, though.
well,
right?
yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work, and I didn't know what I was doing. But the novel that ended You and Me and Him was that practice novel. Mm-hmm. And so in the midst of all of that, I also applied to the MFA program at Eastern and got rejected, which was fine. There were a lot of better writers, and I know that my sample wasn't very good. And so I said to myself, well, you either have to, and I talk about this in my talk, but you either you're going to do this or you're going to say, well, that's it, I'm not good enough, and quit. And so I decided to do it. Unfortunately, in Spokane, we have so many amazing writers, and they're so generous that I was able to get a lot of help, and people would read, and it was, I just can't believe the community here in terms of being a writer. It's just, I can't imagine any place is a better place to learn to be a writer and to have the support. So I did that, and once I'd gone through several drafts, I decided that I needed to hear from somebody who didn't care about my feelings. So I went to a writing conference here in town where there was an agent you could submit 10 pages, and I submitted my 10 pages to her, expecting her to just say, well, it's not, And instead she said, when we had our little 7-minute, I paid for 7 minutes. She read my 10 pages and I got 7 minutes. And she said, I love it. I feel bad. I don't have any notes. I want to see the rest of it. And a week later, she'd signed me to be one of her writers. So it does not happen that way.
Right.
I feel
You didn't
very
have to deal
lucky
with all the rejection.
that
Yeah.
well, I did later. So yeah, so some people, they spend, they send out 100 queries and get rejected as a writer for getting agency. I got an agent before I even queried, but then I got my 40 rejections from publishers. So writing is rejection no matter which way you go. You need to know that. But yeah, I feel very lucky to have somehow engaged, and she's still my agent, even though I've sent her 5 novels that she hasn't wanted between 2015 and now.
Wow, 5.
And I keep saying, you don't have to keep reading these. I mean, I'm not making you any money. And she's like, no, I want to publish I want to be the one who sells your second novel, and I know it's in there. You just have to find it. So she's amazing. I love my agent. Shout out to Carrie Sparks. So yeah, I'm very lucky. Long story long, I'm very lucky to have gotten published, and it's not the way it usually happens.
Well, we want your stories to be long tonight,
Thank
Kris.
you.
Yeah. So you've got 5 novels sitting in the can. What do you think you're going to do with those?
Oh, well, none of them
Are you still working on them?
I
or do you
mean,
just
there's
put them to bed?
most of them are not very good.
Okay.
There's one, the one I'm working on now, I'm still revising and I haven't sent to her. And there's the last one I wrote, I still have hopes for. It's just not, it's not what it should be yet. So I may go back to that one after I finish the one I'm working on now. And that one's another family story, a different family story. So I really love it, and I hope that I can make it work. But a lot of it is just skill. I mean, you learn, people have been doing this for 20, 30 years and still write bad novels. I've only been doing this 10 years, and my first thing I ever wrote got published. So that's not the way it happens. I've got all those novels other people put in the drawer in the trunk under their bed, I'm writing those novels now. So I've got to, go back in.
So I didn't mean to ask this question, but now that I'm thinking about it, you own 2 businesses. Mm-hmm. Are you the type of person who gets up at 6 a.m. every day and blasts out 1,000 words no matter what? Or what's your process?
My process changes with the seasons and with what my other demands are. I'll be honest, the last, since about March of 2020, it has been a tough road to get any writing done. I did finish a draft of the novel I'm working on now, and I've started revising it, but it's been really, really choppy. Before that, I did have periods that were very disciplined, and then other times, owning the 2 retail stores especially, basically the last 2 months of the year, you're not going to get any writing done because you're busy as all get out. And then the summers have gotten so busy now that it's tough to get any writing done during the summers. So it really just depends on what the other demands are. When I'm doing my best work, I feel like I'm on a very regular schedule, where I get up early, I work out, I write, and then I do the other things in my life. And it's a matter of priorities to a certain extent. So the answer is sometimes, I guess. Sometimes I'm that person, but not always.
So we're talking about YA, and YA really kind of went through this big period of being kind of what everybody was reading. What's the state of the YA novel today? How do you feel about what YA books are doing?
I'm not sure I'm a good person to answer that right now, only because for a long time before and after my novel was published, I was feeling like I had to read all the YA stuff that came out, all the YA, and at a certain point, a couple of years after, I just said, okay, I need to stop feeling pressured to read things just because they're on a list or and I just started reading what I wanted. And so I read a lot of YA still, but not everything that comes out. Because I was that person, like if I went to a conference with somebody, anyone who was there, I had to read all their stuff so that I could be that person who'd read, So maybe we're both speakers at a conference, but I've read everything that this other person has written. And there's so many great books out there, and there's so many great genres out there, and there's so many great nonfiction books and, historical books and all these things that weren't a part of the YA universe. But having said that, I think that YA is stronger than it's ever been. It is one of the biggest parts of the publishing market. So just in terms of money, it's still a huge part of that. But I think because there's been a big push, especially in children's and young adult publishing, the push for diversity came, I think, earlier, and it's been pushed harder because representation matters so much for kids. Not that it doesn't for adults, but it's crucial.
While they're forming their identity.
Right, it's crucial for kids that that they see themselves in the stories that they're reading and in the pictures in those stories and all of those things. And so the children's and the YA publishing industry had really been pushing for that for even beyond, a lot longer than I think the adult agency. And so I think that both the decision makers and the people who are getting published and the illustrators are all much more diverse now than they were 10 years ago, which is awesome. I don't know if my book came out right now, I don't know if it would be published, and that's okay. I'm glad it did get published when it did, but there are a lot of people who have been elevated that weren't getting seen then. And I think that's fantastic.
Well, and that's interesting. That's something that has changed over the last 6 years since you published your novel. One of the questions I was going to ask you later, but I'll ask you now, since so much has changed over the last 6 years, do you think you have a different or another TED Talk in you?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
I'm not soliciting.
Yeah, no, I don't. I haven't honestly. I hadn't given it any thought.
You should.
I'm a learning, evolving person. I'm sure I have ideas that are, different than the ones I had.
Well, then. I have some of the questions that's going to ask you about being a learning and evolving person.
Good.
This is the longest question that I have to ask because it's a quotation from your talk that I thought was really interesting. It stuck with me, and
should have gone back and rewatched.
No. I'll tell you what you said. You said the point of many of these stories is that the characters don't know what they're doing. And that's exactly where they're supposed to be. And if we're honest, it's exactly where many of us still are. And I thought that's true. To feel like, especially even now, I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing and all that. So I said, that's an uncomfortable place to be, not knowing. But in some ways, isn't one of the things that we try to do in these stories is to give us a model to follow and say, is that what, I guess what I'm asking is, why do you think it's important for stories to put us in that spot of not knowing?
Well, for me, I think in any story, I don't want it to be didactic. I don't want it to show me how I'm supposed to behave or what I'm supposed to say or how I'm supposed to. Go ahead, give me a hero in a story. That's great. But they better be real, and the struggle better be real for them. So there have to be those moments of not knowing, of uncertainty, of true, I don't know if I can get through this. I don't know if I can do this thing. That has to be authentic. So great if something shows us a path through that. But if it's a really, really good story, it's going to feel like that path is unique to that person, and maybe it can extrapolate to some extent to other situations, but that it's not going to be necessarily a model in terms of it's going to be a didactic teaching you how to do this thing or showing you what the right, like people always talk about how fairy tales were meant to be like, show you not to wander off alone or talk to strangers or whatever. And they do that, and they do it brutally. And I'm not sure that, I think one of the reasons that they're not as satisfying for the modern reader is that the characters aren't developed. It's really about that lesson more than it is about, tell me what you know about Red Riding Hood. You don't know much about Red Riding Hood from the original.
As a character, yeah.
We've got lots of retellings that have filled her out, but so I think the modern reader and the modern storyteller want something that feels more authentic and feels more like it's like that true human struggle. So I think that's what I was getting at there, and also just that maybe the model is and the encouragement comes from the fact that these characters do struggle. Like it doesn't all just come together for them. That they don't know what they're doing.
They're not superheroes.
Yeah, they're not supposed to know what they're doing. They're 17 or 27 or 47 or whatever.
So as you're answering that question, I wonder, do you plan your novel to the point where you know how it's going to end, or do you get into the middle of that and say, these characters are taking me in different places, and this novel could end any number of different ways. How do you plan that out?
I tend to be I tend to start with characters and maybe like a sort of a scenario. So like with You and Me and Him, it's a love triangle. I had this idea of this girl who has a best friend who's gay, and they both fall for the same guy. So that was like my scenario. And I wasn't sure how it was going to play out. I didn't know if the guy was going to end up being gay and go with her best friend. I didn't know if they were going to I didn't know, but I had the characters in mind. Like I knew kind of who they were. And so then I go through a very, people laugh at me because it's all writing that doesn't go in the novel. But I go through these character questionnaires that are like pages and pages, like 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 words. Wow. Where I actually interview the characters, even if they're not the person who's telling the story. So like in my story, it's the first person from the point of view of Maggie, who's the main character. But I do a first person interview with her best friend Nash and with Tom and with all the other characters, so that I know who they are. So that's kind of where I start. And I can't really get much writing done in the story until I know who these people are, because once I know who they are, then I know how they're going to behave in situations that I throw them into. Mm-hmm. So I might have I heard Jess Walter talk one time about he knows the shape of a story, but he doesn't necessarily know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, I've thought a lot about that since I heard him say that. And I feel like I start with the characters and then I kind of try them out in different shapes until one seems to fit. But I'm not one of those people that outlines the whole thing and knows everything that's going to happen. I write a lot of stuff that ends up in the cannibal file or whatever. The different writers call them different things. But if I write a great scene, but it just isn't working for this book, I'll just put it in the cannibal file, and maybe another book or something else will use it for that. But yeah, I start with the characters and maybe a little bit of a scenario, and then see what happens.
As you're talking about that, I'm wondering, do your characters ever surprise you, even though you've created them?
Yeah, in those interviews.
Oh, in the interviews,
yeah. Because I ask everything from what's your favorite board game to, what are you most proud of, to what restaurant did your family go to growing up? I mean, it's all these I've cannibalized it from different character interview questions online, and I have about 70 of them or something that I go through with these characters. So yeah, a lot of times I don't know what they're going to say until they say it, and that sounds crazy, but so it's in there somewhere. But and when I just get into that and just write it through, and I try and do those in one or two sessions, otherwise it gets really chopped up and I can't remember what they said and that kind of thing. So once I get that person's voice rolling, I try and do that. And then that also helps me later with dialogue, because once I have that person's voice, then the dialogue is easier to write for that person. So
That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
I
mean,
don't
it's an act of creation. It's an act of getting to know a person in a way.
in a way, yeah.
And
It's
you're
weird.
not putting words in their mouth. They're telling you who they are.
Yeah, a little bit, which sounds a little crazy. I have a postcard over my writing desk that says writer's block is when your imaginary friends stop talking to you. So that's kind of like, it's a little bit of how
Yeah,
it is
I love
for me.
that. That's great. So in your talk, you also talked about the Ouroboros, and you talked about reinvention, and then it wouldn't be, a talk in 2021 without talking about the pandemic. How have you reinvented yourself since 2015? Not just pandemic, but since 2015.
Gosh, a bunch of different ways. I mean, we running 2 stores over the last couple of years has been a challenge, to say the least. I think we were talking before we started tonight, and it's we feel like brand new business owners, even though like Blue Radleys we've had for 28 years. So we're not newbies, but we've felt like newbies a lot over the last couple of years. In particular, I mean, I'm not qualified to make public health decisions, and yet I've had to do that over and over. I'm not a trained therapist, and yet I've needed to do that for people, that have worked with us, and things that are just because it's just everyone's in a spot, and they're all in a different spot at a different time, and the anxieties rise and fall, and for all of us. So it's been a strange and interesting journey, and I've tried to just be grateful and pay attention to a lot of that. But it's been exhausting. I mean, I'm tired, and my staff is tired, and my husband is tired, and our daughter's tired of listening to us tell stories. And but I think the thing probably for me on a deeper level that has evolved since that TED Talk is probably just that idea of, I'm sure a lot of people just cringe when they hear me say I've had 5 failed novels or whatever since mine came out. But for me, like, I really do love writing. I didn't let myself do it for so long in my life, for over 40 years. And now when I get to do it, it is joy. It's a treat. I love it. And I feel like I published a novel. How many people get to do that? If I never publish another one, I'd love to publish another one. But if I never have to get to, I still feel lucky that I live in a space where I get to write, and I get to publish a short story every once in a while when the spokesman asks me to do it for the summer stories. And so that gratitude and feeling like making stuff is a really important part of my life now, whereas for a long time, I had put that on the back burner and just been happy to be, just living and being a parent and being a teacher and being a business owner and all of these things that kept me very busy. But getting to make stuff is great, and I love that. And even though it's been harder the last year and a half to find that creative space, when I have found it, it's brought me a lot of joy. So I think probably that's the biggest change for me, is just evolving. Publishing Center. I took a couple classes right before everything closed down for letterpress and I don't know what you call it when you carve the blocks and then they print it, mono printing, woodcut printing. And I just fell in love with it. I was just so excited. So I decided to join, even though I couldn't go for a while. They weren't open because I just wanted them to be here when it was all over so I could go back. So I've just gone back and I've been back just once in the last month to do some letterpress, and they're just so great over there, so it's finding new ways to make stuff, cross stitch and stupid, just like just making stuff. So
and you think that all came about because of that novel that you wrote? Huh?
I think I had, for most of my life, I had talked about myself as not a creative person. I'm good at a lot of things. I'm smart. But I'm not a creative person. I don't have good ideas. And so when I let go of that, and then all of these wonderful things happened, then I was able to flip that and say, oh, this isn't, because I think, I have this pet theory. I'm going to get myself.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
So one of the things I struggle with a lot in our society is that we tell kids that you're only allowed to fill in the blank if you're good at it. You're only allowed to be a singer if you're good enough to make the choir. You're only allowed to play soccer if you can make the team. You're only allowed to draw if you're a good drawer. You're only allowed, whatever it is, you're only allowed to write if the teacher reads your poem in class. So we let them do it for a little bit, and then slowly we wean out so that in the end, there's only a handful of kids in high school who identify
And
as
we
artists.
internalize that and tell ourselves that as
Right,
well.
exactly.
Yes.
And so it's something that I really struggle with because I think we are, as people, meant to be creative people, and we block all of these ways that we could be doing that by making it, by formalizing it, instead of just letting people do the thing, you know? And so I think I totally bought into that as a human. And
Well, it's fear of being
yeah,
judged. and
right, yeah,
evaluated.
because it's about evaluation rather than just about making stuff, because that's the culture that we live in to a large extent. And so so I feel very grateful that I have sort of in my old age transitioning away from that and just letting myself make stuff and not caring who thinks it's good or not. So so I hope people do that sooner than I did in my life. But I do think if there's one big change I can say from like when I left teaching in 2009 and then got the novel published, and then since then just saying, it's all gravy at this point. Like I just get to do
You
stuff.
enjoy the process.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I love it.
Well, and as you were talking about that, we worked with kids, especially when you're working with little kids. They sing, they dance, they draw, they write, they make
Yeah.
books, they open stores, you know. And so I think you're absolutely right. And we just start to get that I mean, maybe we could circle it back to YA when we start saying, oh, who am I? What am I supposed to do? I'm being looked at by all these other people. That goes away. So that's really neat. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there a graphic novel in your future?
No,
Are you going to start
no.
binding your own books? like
Maybe I would love
McSweeney's
to
Press
take.
or
I would love
something?
to take a book, but they have those at that Spokane Prime. Plug for Spokane Prime Publishing Center. You should get them to do a
That's
TED
Derek
Talk.
Freeland,
They're
right?
Derek and Tom Caraway and who else?
Derek Landers, is he still doing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm losing everyone else's
They're
names,
on
but
social
they're
media. You can
great.
find
They're
them.
great. You should go check them out. They have great classes. Yeah. So that's just. I mean, that's just another piece of it. But yeah. So I feel like I'm figuring that stuff out. Figuring out how to be a
I
creative
need to
human.
do more of that. I'm going to start doing that.
Come on down.
I
Take
will.
a class. The letterpress class was
Give me a call. You have my number.
Yeah.
Okay. So in your talk, you also say YA novels and the teens they're written about and for have hope and possibility. How have you maintained your sense of hope and possibility over the last few years? Or have
Well,
you?
in this moment, I keep telling people, it's like I am just continually having to consciously call up my compassionate heart, because there's a lot of, it's a tough world right now. There's just been so much pain and heartbreak over the last couple of years. And so I'm going to be totally honest, I've been reading a lot of Pima Chodron. Who's
Good choice.
wonderful. Her book Things Fall Apart, I just keep reading it over and over. And just I've been on Headspace the last couple of years a lot more than I had been before, which is a meditation app. But it's work every day for me because, working in the service industry, anyone who's been working in restaurants or stores or any of those kinds of things over the last couple of years has seen both the best and the worst in humanity. And so to remind ourselves that however people are acting, that it's coming out of their own sense of fear or pain or whatever, or joy or wherever they're at, and that we've all been there. But it's hard. It's hard every day.
Well, I can imagine this flourishing of your creativity too really helps too. I mean, I hate to say
Yeah.
art is therapy, but
No, it is.
yeah.
It is. Making stuff reminds me of who I am and I focus less on who everyone else appears to be in moments when they're maybe not at their best. So.
And you're in the
So,
moment.
Yeah.
You're
yeah,
right there.
exactly.
You're not
yeah.
thinking about
You're not thinking about the future or going back over what you should have said to that person in the past.
Right.
Yeah. So, but
want
it's I'm not that evolved. So I guess that's what I want to say.
Well, I want you to hold me accountable because I want to start doing that. Okay, so we probably should wrap this up. But I already asked this question. But actually, before we even wrap this up, well, first of all, we're going to take any questions if anybody has any questions. Do we have some questions?
We do have one.
Awesome.
To Kris, what was your feeling walking off the stage during your TED Talk versus walking onto it?
Oh, well, and I was the second to last speaker, I think, on my year. And the person coming after me, I've forgotten his name, but he's this amazing guy who does family therapy.
Was it Kent Hoffman?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was Kent. And so I was
That's
really
tough. That's
excited.
tough.
I was so excited to see his speech. So I was already thinking about that. But I think going on was a bit of I felt like I was I felt kind of like I did. I remember feeling this at my book launch, and I didn't know what it was, but it was on the verge of a panic attack, I think, where it's like this almost out-of-body experience. And I kind of felt like that going on to the TED stage as well. And coming off, I felt grounded. I felt centered. I felt like I had done what I came there to do, and so I felt good. And excited to hear Kent's talk, which was amazing.
Yeah, he's an amazing just person.
Yeah.
Just the wisdom that it oozes out of him.
Yes.
Is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Did we have any other questions?
Not currently.
Okay. Oh, great.
In film and video production, there's a phrase, kill your darlings.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
How does that translate to you in your work?
Yeah, it's also a thing for the writers. You have to be willing to just let go of anything that doesn't serve the story and the characters, and the story that you're telling, I should say, because in every story there's a whole bunch of different branches you could go on. But sometimes you write this beautiful scene, or you get this great bit of dialogue, and you're just like, unnecessary. It's just filler. Like, it doesn't actually serve the story that you're telling. So it's sometimes hard to do, but it almost always makes the story better. So I am lucky to be surrounded by and coached by writers that are much better than me. So I almost always listen to them when they say, "Oh, you just need to cut that last line." That actually happened with I had a summer story for the Spokesman this year, and the theme was the lost year, and I wrote one that ended with a sinkhole swallowing people's houses, and I had one line at the end that didn't appear in the story. The draft I sent to my writing group. And they all said, get rid of that last line. That last sentence doesn't need to be there. And I listened to them, and they were absolutely right. Yeah. So it's. I think
Did you chafe at that when they first told you?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, because I had already thought it, and then it was funny because my husband read the draft with that line in, and he was bummed that I took it out. He thought that was a good line. So I think it could have gone either way, but I was really happy with that cut. So I think. And I tend to write smaller than I should. Like, there are some writers who write big and then they have to cut everything back, and I tend to write smaller and then I have to add. So it's less of an issue for me a lot of times. But yeah, I think anytime you're storytelling, you have to decide, which turns you're going to take and which pieces of scenery aren't going to be there. So.
Well, and I mean, even if I could ask you a question, one of the interesting things that I'm interested in, just from an editor's perspective, is why do you fall in love with that thing that has to be cut? Because it's a darling and you love it, but why do you love it so much? Because when you're going to have to get rid of it.
Well, you don't know that when you make it.
Right, but then you say, why do I love this so much when the story is really better without it?
Yeah, sometimes you have to write that thing to get to the story, and I don't know, maybe with video and stuff, like it's just such a beautiful piece of film, or it's just like it's such a great quote or whatever, but it just doesn't fit the overall arc.
Or maybe you remember writing it and you just that feeling you had when you wrote it.
Like you knew it was good when you wrote it,
right.
but it wasn't good
Doesn't
for the
fit.
story. I don't know if you have any other.
Well, I'm not mic'd, so I don't want to talk too long. My realm is more documentary, so oftentimes it doesn't serve the core of the story. That's often the result. Other times it could be like you reveal something like interesting about that person, but again, if it doesn't serve the story, then it's not often got to go, especially when, like, for my format, short format for web, marketing and stuff. Like, oh, that's cool. Maybe it can live as a little thing for another context, but for the purposes of this thing that I'm working on, oftentimes it
Yeah, just doesn't fit.
more often than not.
Yeah.
And you had something.
One last one, and we'll wrap up with, I think we have some this year's speakers watching, because our question is, what is the one thing that you would suggest to a future speaker to do to prepare for their talk?
Well, other than just keep pressing with your coach so that you get to the good ideas. Like, don't stay on the surface. Just keep having those conversations until you get to the really meaty good ideas. And then again, the recording. I think that was the best advice I got, was just to record it on my phone. And I did it in sections, so I could listen to one section over and over, and then I would listen to that section and the next session, and then I'd add and add and add. But I was listening to it in the car, on my workouts, while I was making dinner. I mean, I listened to it over and over, and that just made it, I felt really solid about the memorization, which left me able to enjoy the moment a little bit more, rather than just worrying I was going to get lost in it. So those would be the two biggest pieces.
Well, and
I
that's a
think.
good segue because the second thing that you said, it would be something that would be very helpful for somebody who is speaking at our October 9th TEDx event.
Yes.
TEDxSpokane. We are going to be live at the Bing at 6:30 at night. I have good news and bad news. The good news, it will be a live event, but because the Bing is only going at 50%, we have closed the tickets for live participation. You can still purchase tickets to stream the event, and you would just go to TEDxSpokane.com. We would love to have you. We have 10 speakers. It is our 10th anniversary. X is the Roman numeral for 10. We've just got so many 10s, we don't know what to do with them. So if you're out there, our 10 speakers, record and listen. It's the best podcast ever, right? Just listening to
just
yourself.
listening to yourself over and over.
Over
yes.
and over. Okay. So thank you so much, Kris,
Thank
for
you.
being here with
Thanks,
us. It's so
Eric.
good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
And also, Atticus and Boo Radley's, go down and give them a smile.
Thanks.